First of all, I'd like to introduce my esteemed guest, Dr. Dean Burnham. Now, if you could humor me, Dr. Burnham, I'd like to tell my classmates a little bit about your background. Dr. Burnham has his doctorate from Harvard in government with a specialty in voting behaviors and political parties. He has many honors such as the Frank Irwin Centennial Chair in Government at the University of Texas and is a member of American Academy of Arts and Sciences, an honorary doctorate from Rutgers University, and an endowed chair at UT. So, my first question is that I understand that you're well-versed in critical realignment, and how would that relate to the current political atmosphere?
Let me simply say that it is obvious that we are in the midst of an enormous critical realignment sequence, which is as large as any that we have seen and perhaps as dangerous as anything since the one that helped to produce the Civil War in the 1850s. There have been others since, and before, so the big data points that they often point to, and it's nothing new with me or anything, they were doing this even before the Second World War, would be 1800, 1828, 1860, 1896, and 1932, down through those five sequences. And so there is a pattern there, and it's a pattern that says for a long time not a whole lot changes fundamentally, but demand builds up because the folks who are running the store are uninterested in accommodating it because they have very complicated games to run from which they profit. And why incorporate all this odd demand from places who you don't respect or people you don't respect and mess up your game? So there is a tendency for built into the constitutional structure, by the way, divided government, literally, President, Congress, Supreme Court, and administrative rules and so on. And also federalism. There are 50 states, each one of them has its own particular views about things, and depending on what its politics looks like, and so on. Complicated system. And it thus creates a situation where you have a kind of cumulative under-absorption of demand until something really goes wrong, at which point some sort of triggering event or events can trigger an explosion, which is what it is. And your chart is going to look something like this, followed by this, followed by this, followed by this. And so, excuse me, basically the thing to do is to try to figure out what it is all about, and you can formulate it very simply, but then you want to fill in the details, and they can be complicated. I am a guy who likes to think in terms of the bigger picture, but I also am a fanatic for getting the details right. Some of them are tiny details in tiny places, which I won't get into. Some of them are much bigger, but they are details, and I am very insistent on getting those details right. And so my first book, which is over there on the floor, I should have brought it up here with me, is a little enterprise that I started as a hobby in undergraduate, in high school actually, and it just sort of added on one thing to another. So before I entered the Army, in fact, I completed it when I was 22, and then I went in the Army, and after that I submitted it to Harvard as my writing sample. It's about 900 pages long, it's about the size of a telephone. Wow. And they admitted me, amazingly enough. And so then off to Harvard, I trotted out of sweeping up the orderly room in Arlington, in Fort Devens. There I am, Fort Devens, in January 1956, sweeping up the floor, and then listening to Carl Friedrich, the great political philosopher, talking about Thomas Aquinas, and on deep into the night. The adaptation was pretty rough at times, it was, anyway. But anyway, I survived. And after that, one thing pretty much led to another. I often think of myself as having done point-by-point navigation from land end to another land end to another land end, like the old ships in the Mediterranean used to do. And so one thing led to another, and by the time I was about 40, I had written what some have been kind enough to call a seminal book called Critical Election. elections in the mainsprings of American politics. And after that, why, the thing that I'm giving you, which is edited, or I should say it's a discussion of my work, about 4 pages long, in the Rosenoff volume, will tell you what, how that looked. And I'm sure if that gets circulated among your classmates, I have no objection, by the way, then, they'll get a sense of what this looks like. I hope that's of some help.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed.
So we have a major critical realignment underway, complete with runaway electorates. You don't see that very often in any realignment. I see only 2 in American history, and only one in the most lethal of all critical realignments, the one that elevated Hitler to power in Germany in 1933, which I graphed that looks like this. If you want to take this along and have it reproduced or something, feel free. I've got another copy around. And that's a nice little, what that is the so-called S-curve, or logistic curve. And it was developed by some folks in in Johns Hopkins Medical School around 1920 to describe what happens when, they were looking at things like Drosophila or bacteria. I mean, it sounds very, whatever happened to free will, but I'm not going to get into that subject. You start off with a nutrient solution. You intrude at some point a living organism, feeds on the nuclear, it goes up like that until it hits a ceiling where die-off equals reproduction. It's a nice little thing. I think it's original. I don't think anybody ever did anything quite like that with a logistic curve before. Whether or not, I think it perfectly describes, you can see the fit between the state elections in Germany and the nature of the curve here, which can be specified by that kind of equation, which is all very complicated. You don't need to worry about it. All you can do is see the dots on the come very close to the line. You're able to do that because they had state elections in between the R's there, which are the elections for the national parliament, the Reichstag. So one R here, one here, several were at the very end of the crisis cycle, and then bingo, that was it. I hope that makes that relatively clear.
Yes. Could you, for my classmates, maybe give a more dumbed-down version of what critical realignment actually is?
Yeah, I will try.
Okay.
I wouldn't say dumbed down. Let's make it as simple as possible. Yeah. Given our continental size, given the fact that we missed an important historical transformation in politics in the Western world that had to do with the impact of capitalism and industrialization on a previously more or less agrarian society. Given all that, what happens is that given our inadequacies in some respects and our rigidities in the kind of constitutional structure we have, and the fact that, what can you say? You talk contradictions and say, Marxism, no. Or Hegel, well, nobody understands.